President Bola Tinubu on Thursday canvassed for direct elections into the ECOWAS Parliament. President Tinubu said the move would give citizens of member states a say in who represents them at sub-regional levels. His comments came at a time the regional body's parliament is still being constituted by existing lawmakers from the 15 member states. Professor Eghosa Osagie is Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, and he joins us now to look at the merits and demerits of President Tinubu's proposal. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to the program today. And I'm going to get straight into the conversation. The merits and demerits. The president spoke about a strong representation directly elected by citizens being a vehicle that can deepen democracy within ECOWAS member states. How feasible is this?
Well, first, I think the attribution should be very clearly made. The president says there's a proposal before the ECOWAS on this matter. So it's not something that the president himself is initiating. It's a proposal on board, and, as you have said, the president also made the same point, that ECOWAS is in the search for the kinds of practices and institutional guarantees that can deepen democracy in the region. So to that extent, as he himself has said, he will support that proposal. Nigeria will support that proposal for very cogent and important reasons. The first being, of course, that Nigeria is today Africa's biggest democracy, and that point has been highlighted in the 4 Ds of our foreign policy. Democracy is an integral part of that. Our president himself is a Democrat. He has been through those struggles, and Nigeria has become a strong defender of democracy and democratization in West Africa and Africa itself. The president has said, if you look at the ECOWAS protocol on good governance, it's very strongly entrenched there. ECOWAS has a strong place for citizens and citizen diplomacy. I'm sure you yourself will know that we are all ECOWAS citizens. There is such a thing as an ECOWAS passport, which we carry, and the ECOWAS protocol on free movement of persons and so on. All of these are building blocks for a very resilient, citizen-based regional integration. And if, we want to respond appropriately to the kinds of challenges that have come from the region in the most recent past, these are proposals that should be considered seriously. The ECOWAS Parliament is a very central organ, and if it is possible to have direct elections to that parliament, then of course you've brought another layer, another important constituency. It's always been there, but we have not integrated it in the manner that this proposal suggests. So why not? A citizen-based, a citizen-based ECOWAS, the one where they're able to exercise the franchise, is important, is useful, is good. And it can be one way of checkmating the excesses of, certain tendencies that our leaders have within the region itself. So, the EU, the European Union, has found this as a useful instrument. Since 1979, you've had direct elections, of members of the EU Parliament. It's not because the ECOWAS must be like EU, of course, but, so we have proven best practice cases that, suggest to us that this proposal is a very good one.
Well, so proponents, people who see it your way, do argue that the direct elections would enhance the democratic legitimacy and accountability of the ECOWAS Parliament. However, when it comes to the critics, they're saying that it could lead to further polarization and conflicts along national and ethnic lines. Just wondering how you would weigh these concerns.
No, but I mean, these critics must be, people who are so dyed in the wool, of these old configurations. And, the centrifugal forces that you refer to, for instance, as ethnic and those kinds of divisions. Now, West Africa and ECOWAS, these categories are not simply to be defined in terms of ethnicity or religion or whatever. Now, if you were asking what would the modalities be for direct elections, that's a different matter. In the EU, they have European Union parties, and elections are held on the basis of the campaigns by these parties for parliament. In the case of ECOWAS, maybe the proposal would include having ECOWAS-wide parties, political parties, because right now I think that the members of parliament are delegated from existing parliaments, states and countries and so on. But if we have direct elections, you think of it, I mean, they would help to countervail the kinds of forces that you're talking about. Those divisions would become secondary, because now you'll be talking about pan-regional interests. We'll be having people who represent their countries and not their ethnic groups, not their religious groups, in parliament and so on. So the people have a say in what those people are going to be doing, and that's the foundation of accountability. So I would think, that in terms of deepening our democracy and our democratic practice, in terms of strengthening the unity of ECOWAS itself, in terms of giving the people a voice, in terms of the non-state actors that we have, and those are the people that we have given the pride of place in the new contemplations. It's a good proposal that is worthy of further consideration. So all told, I think that, what you are looking for would be ways of, responding to the more immediate challenges before ECOWAS as a regional body. The fact that the time has come, I think this is what this proposal is saying, to bring the people to the center of our focus. The way the people are being, elevated and strengthened in national structures, in individual countries. If we can do that at the regional level, that would be a game changer.
All right. It's quite profound to have a conversation about deepening democracy when we look at what's currently transpiring in ECOWAS. Besides, the Nigers and the Malis and Burkina Faso, just look at Togo and the fact that, they're struggling to get the next election on the road. Look at what Senegal had to overcome. Guinea, I mean, there's a lot going on in the ECOWAS bloc right now for us to talk about deepening democracy and for us to even introduce the idea of somewhat of a general election. Don't you think that there are other ways, other steps that first need to be taken to ensure that all ECOWAS member states are on the same page before we start trying to introduce the intricacies of another election to nations who are mostly struggling with their own internal electoral processes?
Unfortunately, the real world does not operate on the basis of the kinds of sequencing, that you've talked about. It's not as if, we deal with one issue first and, we now have time to move on to the next and so on and so on. These are simultaneous processes, and all of them, are complementary. You move in, all of these things, all of the directions. You have to address those kinds of issues. Now, think of what has happened in Senegal, for instance, and contrast that with the reversals that, unfortunate reversals that we have seen in, say, Mali or Burkina Faso or Niger or even Guinea. The fact that this is a centerpiece of the Francophone domain in West Africa, i.e., that is Senegal, is very significant. And people talk about the kinds of effects that come from best practices, from successful cases, from good experiences, and so on. I mean, what has happened in Senegal is a signal to the rest of the region. There are people who applaud the fact that youth has finally emerged. That's a strong factor. There are those who applaud the fact that we had those threats to democracy in Senegal, but it's been possible to overcome them through peaceful means. So that means that we don't always have a zero-sum situation where it is either this or this. There are several other options that are between, the devil and the deep blue sea, as it were. So Senegal has demonstrated, that where the people have a will and they are able to have a say, it is that would eventually emerge. And as for the kinds of lessons to be learned, the president of Senegal is very clear. He sent the right messages. He's quite, willing and able to do what, the ECOWAS chairman, President Tinubu, has said. I mean, we have gotten to a point in ECOWAS where we can no longer be driven by external forces, that seek to divide, the union that we have. So, in a way, I see that we are all pushing together in the direction of stronger and deeper democracies. And, the kinds of statements that the parliament itself can make, the kinds of statements that are coming from the ECOWAS heads of state, the kinds of celebrations, of major milestones, that help us to recalibrate our own democratic potentials. Those things are critical to the development. So all told, I will simply say, yes, the critics have their way and their say, but they all contribute to the building of a very resilient culture, the kind that we are seeing all over the place. And, these are overtures to Niger, to Mali and to Burkina Faso, that ECOWAS really, is not an enemy. ECOWAS is the friend that they have always had. And it is remarkable that there are ECOWAS investments in these countries, that ECOWAS itself is not threatening to take out of those places. So, all of these things are going on, and contrary to what you say and what you say the critics are saying, I think that democracy is getting better in terms of the possibilities that we have seen, and the latest in Senegal is one of those reassuring things that we have seen in West Africa.
Now, when it comes to the cost, there are some concerns that funding, direct elections could, across the vast ECOWAS region, could be a significant financial burden, potentially diverting resources from other regional priorities. So how can the cost effectiveness and sustainability of direct elections be ensured, especially when it comes to resource-constrained member states?
No, well, you're making a very fundamental point about the cost of democracy in general. They have elections, whether at the national level or at the sub-national level. Now, these things require mobilization of resources. Elections are no longer cheap things, if they ever were. It's a global thing. Now, how do you manage to have those parties that have a pan-regional flavor? Is it because maybe what you still have in mind is a party in Nigeria that has to go beyond Nigeria to canvass for votes in say, Ghana or the Ivory Coast and so on? I think, what the EU has shown is that there will be political parties that will have the regional flavor. But those are details to be worked out. I don't think they can right now be considered obstacles, in the way if this proposal to have direct elections is you might as well say, are we going to have regional INEC, for instance, and so on. But those are details, for how to implement the proposal once we adopt the proposal. So at this stage, it's just to think about it. But of course, if you're going to have elections, we also have to adopt an electoral system. It can be proportional representation, for instance, which may not require that you go, across the entire region. You can have, the first past the post system that would locate, representation simply within the constituency itself. So, but like I said, these are details, that will be worked out as we go along. It is just as well that this is a good proposal. It should be considered in its entirety. The potentials are there. The benefits are enormous. And I think it is time to bring the people fully back into the ECOWAS architecture.
Right. Now, Professor, very quickly before you go, as we emphasize bringing people back into the ECOWAS architecture, is this possibly a response to the fact that some of the leaders of the member states are not really playing ball with ECOWAS? So it's almost coming across as a power play. So, for example, one of the highlights at this meeting was bringing Guinea back into the fold. Of course, we also have seen, more warming diplomacy towards Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger. So is there a sense that if there are representatives for ECOWAS elected directly by the people from within these countries, that there's some sort of leverage to balance out when the leadership of those countries don't dance to the tune of ECOWAS?
I think you have made perhaps the strongest point, that is that the people are those that hold their leaders to account. Let's take another parallel from the EU itself. The EU president is a nominee of, I think the EU Council, but has to be elected by the EU Parliament. And we are building layers of, not just democracy here, but layers of, responsibility and accountability. And one hopes that this extension that, we are considering for Parliament can also become applicable even to the executive, committee of ECOWAS, in which case, maybe in future we might find, that people also have a say in who can be chair of ECOWAS, who can be chair of the Committee of Heads of State. Maybe Parliament itself will then be able to, on behalf of the people, have a say. But I think, you have made this strong point that there is a response now to how people can, hijack power and say that they are doing things on behalf of people that have not elected them. And therefore, you can have that direct representation in Parliament becoming another layer, of oversight, another layer of, answerability, and therefore the proper questions can be asked, and people have to answer, those things. Imagine a situation where, there's a disjuncture between the structure of government at the state level and the structure of government at ECOWAS level. So this will be one of the ways of reducing the possible discrepancy and contradiction that might exist.
Well, Professor Eghosa Osagie, DG NIIA, thank you so much for shedding light on this matter. You've spoken very well, and we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us here on Newsday.